it's not.
Good evening. Welcome. So it is Tuesday, November 12th. It is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. It is 4:30 p.m. and I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education order.
Flanagan. Here. Haig. Here. King. Here. McHugh. North.
Here. I look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. I'll second. Flanagan. Yes. Haig. Yes. King. Yes. North.
Yes. Okay, we have Scott Bain with us this evening. Would you like to do an introduction?
Mr. Bain, would you like to come up and present your first in the agenda? I mean, that's like, it's like you gotta take advantage of that, okay? Just so you know, it's like, some of us may be envious of you right now. Just kidding. So Scott is going to present a little bit about King Murphy Elementary and some other curricular type things going on there as well across the district, but kind of with emphasis on King Murphy. So go ahead, Scott.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you guys for being flexible with my presentation date. So I was supposed to go next week, but I'm going to be out of town. So thank you all for letting me do that, or do this tonight. The other thing that I'll mention before I get started, while Kristen's getting this up, is so a few weeks back, I was going to present about elementary curriculum elements, and that one was postponed. And so when setting this one up and talking to Tom, I just merged those together. So I am going to talk about sort of the state of the King Murphy Nation, but also some just broader curriculum continuity between King Murphy and Carlson that you would see.
So it's sharing right on the presentation, but this is the view that comes up. Is it letting you move slides?
If I'm doing it right. Might not be.
If not, I can stop sharing and reshare.
Let's try again. Yeah. There you go. Let's see if that'll advance.
Oh, but wait, let me reshare it now because I stopped sharing. And you can get it out.
Yeah, move over here. Is that all right if I stand over here? I mean, my audience appears to
If
be,
you want to. You don't have
no offense to you guys.
You could
but-
sit, you could interpretive dance.
And then I can read my own slides. Yeah.
Hi, I'm sure 6, and I just wanted to.
He did send us a message. Thank you.
Thanks for letting us know, okay? You sent me a message a little while ago.
All right, good.
Should I test it for advancing?
Should I try it from my computer?
Yeah, do you want to do
Yeah,
that?
that's what I
Because Ethan got me in a view, I think.
Well, let's see here.
I'm just going to go.
There's
to see how to do it.
missing board members too.
Just carry.
Carrie,
Okay.
is she,
Go that way.
she's not gonna make it?
Yeah, whichever way was. Because you were presenting.
Yeah, I kind of gathered. I mean, I wouldn't want to come either.
She said water pipes burst, so she is on like
Yeah.
crazy cleanup.
It's
So,
weird that we went from the warmest fall I've ever experienced to
yes.
2 feet of snow overnight,
2 days,
effectively.
yeah.
Like,
It was cool.
quite the transition.
think it's, I can just click as you go along, okay?
Okay,
I don't think your clicker will work.
okay. Can you put it on full screen, like presentation mode?
Yes, I will.
I suppose it's okay to just leave it on that if you just want to advance it that way. I mean, people will still be able to see
Not able to advance it though either.
what the,
Oh, wait. There we go. There you go.
okay.
I'm gonna skip to this one here, okay?
Okay, so welcome. Thanks for coming
Oh, Did it go?
to
Oh, 'cause
the
I'm
study
still
session.
sharing.
Um, There's people viewing online too.
I think there was
There's a couple.
All right, well, thank you for being here.
Oh,
Presenting
you are
I
presenting.
got it, yeah, I got it.
to you all about curriculum alignment between the elementary schools and an update of the goings on at King Murphy. So I thought I'd start with this slide, which I'm sure you guys have seen this before. This is the current iteration of the story the district would like to tell about ourselves and what's going on. And I just, those bolded phrases of sparks engagement, produces high quality work, deepens community connections, builds essential skills, feel a strong sense of belonging so that every student can thrive. And those are really lovely, lofty philosophical words about what our best hopes are for what ought to be happening in schools. And so then how do you turn those into action items? And that's what I would say that's what this presentation is about, is taking those ideas and making them actionable, turning philosophy into practice. So at King Murphy specifically, obviously we have a beautiful location. If you haven't been by lately, feel free to stop by anytime you wish. It's a beautiful drive right at the base of Mount Blue Sky, one of our 14ers. And so we have this super inspiring environment. We have adopted the program that is based on EL education, or expeditionary learning. So CREW is one of those elements that we use to build a sense of belonging. And at King Murphy specifically, we are blessed with fairly small class sizes. We do have a few that are a little bigger this year. Sixth grade's running at 26, and what's the other one at 25? Kindergarten at 25. So, and then we're also sort of expanding our use of EL education and our understanding of the modules curriculum, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And I would say that, those elements combined to help King Murphy Mountain School be a really magical place to be for students, for our families, and for staff. Like, I feel really lucky to have landed where I did. Just an update demographically. So we're running 152 this year, which is effectively the same as last year. It's interesting, we brought in a lot new students, but we had some families move out of town and what have you. So sort of what we gained, we also lost, so we came out effectively static. So our free and reduced percentage, which is really interesting to me because, in our neighborhood, you might not assume 24%, still low relatively speaking across, the metro area or even comparative to Carlson, but 24 is actually surprising to me for our location. I can't really definitively say where those numbers are stemming from, although I would say that there appears to be a phenomenon of younger families who are living with their folks, probably is what I imagine. Account for a percentage of that. We're running about 10% students with IEPs and 6% with students on ALPs. So exciting news, which I believe you all are aware of, but since this is my first opportunity to share with you, I'm gonna take a moment to gloat here. So
We'll begin next, at our business meeting about.
Yes. So the accountability system in the state of Colorado, as I'm sure aware, is based on Senate Bill 163, and that brought us the School Performance Framework and the Unified Improvement Plan, or the UIP. And that system is a 4-tier system that places school as a performance-ranked school, an improvement-ranked school, a priority improvement, or turnaround. Those scores are always operating on a 1-year, basically, delay. So when I started last year, I was inheriting the scores from the previous year, which was the 22. So last year, we were inheriting the 21-22 school year scores going into last year. And so our 22-23 school year, we operated under what was an improvement status. And the thing about that status that was concerning is that the next tier down, priority improvement, I would say that's where you kind of really need to get concerned about what's going on. Not that we shouldn't be able to meet performance level sort of at any point, but we were 0.5 over the threshold to priority improvement. And so, obviously we wanted to address that on some level. I would say that we didn't make it our primary focus. It was just adding awareness to the staff. I think with the leadership turnovers that they'd had and some other factors sort of just took it off the radar a little bit, which is how I talked about where we were last year when I presented to y'all last year. So the exciting news is that we more than doubled our scores and came in at 90 out of 100, which I haven't checked to update, but there are other schools in our vicinity who did not meet that score from their previous years. I need to see where they're at this year because that wasn't public numbers when I checked that last, but previous year's scores for other schools in our area. So one of the things that you do when you're looking at either what's working or what's not working is called a root cause analysis. So you want to kind of take a look at what are those scores, and as a staff sort of talk through, well, why are we getting the scores that we did? And so we did that when we were at 42, and we did it again at 90, because if you're doing something right, you want to keep doing that. So we identified the two areas of sort of improving school culture and academic continuity as two primary factors that you could look at to say this is why our scores increased. So for school culture, obviously, stability and leadership and accountability is important. Obviously, this is just my second year, so long-term stability is yet to be seen, right? But there was a sense that, there was a good chemistry between myself and the staff, I believe. We could survey Rachel to see if she agrees. I mean, I don't want to, pull the wool over you guys. I said that there's good chemistry between myself and the staff.
Oh, yeah.
And so continuity feels good, even though it's been short-lived so far.
Things are calm,
Yeah.
predictable, wonderful communication, all
Thank
the
you.
things we've been longing for
So it feels
a
good.
year and a half prior to your arrival.
Yeah, the culture feels good right now. So when we also talked about a clarity of focus, and this goes back to that initial phrasing in the story we want to tell is this high quality work. And for me, there's, so within the expeditionary learning model, their chief academic officer is a guy named Ron Berger, who happened to be a Kenyan. And he's written several books. And his very first one was called A Culture of Quality. And last year, kind of not knowing the staff, not knowing where we were at, not knowing what they'd already done, kind of wanting to get a lay of the land, I used that because it's a very broad discussion of really just focusing on helping kids do their best work. And that was all we focused on last year, was effectively that, really just helping kids learn how to self-assess, how to do critique, how to look at models of what excellence looks like. And for me personally, I would say that was the biggest factor in the change. We had good staff retention. Over the last couple of years, I did have some, I had my first grade teacher out for maternity leave last year. She's back this year, which is fantastic. That's Kristen Betts. She's phenomenal. We do have new specials teachers, so I have a new art teacher and a new PE teacher. But other than that, the staff has been really static, which is good. And then we're also implementing restorative practices. That's something I came with, but now we're doing that a little broader, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Academically, not being in the first year of adopting a new resource. So the EL modules is a quality curriculum. I think there's a lot of other good ones out there, but EL is a fantastic one, and I'm grateful that you guys chose that for our schools prior to my arrival. But familiarity with it, it's a fairly dense, it's labor intensive as far as planning and what have you, as is the math curriculum as well. So a lot of time goes into sort of getting familiar with. So it's not uncommon to have an implementation dip when you've started a new resource. And so teachers' familiarity, they get through more material before the test actually occurs and things like that. And honestly, like the test scores, I would say it's not my primary driver. Like we didn't make a big push to bring up the scores. The idea was like, if we just help kids do quality work, we should do fine on the test. So I think that was proven by how it played out. I'd actually anticipated numbers dropping in math because of that same implementation situation, which is fairly common, but they did not, which was interesting. We actually did quite well. One of the factors there, just to cheerlead my teachers some more, is Megan Bridges is a new teacher last year to the 5-6, and we do a combo 5-6 where we departmentalize. So we have a math teacher and an English teacher, just to give them a little bit of feel for that middle school experience. And so she was an experienced teacher, but had been like a 504 coordinator for the previous couple of years when she came back to teaching. And so, sort of had to get her feet back under her, but her NWA numbers, which aren't always predictive of CMAS, but they can give you some clues, were really fantastic last year. So it's feeling super good about her skills as a math teacher. It also, by having those two resources, we now have a predictable content, right? There's common language, K through 12, and I think that will only just strengthen over time as kids have this common experience. Teachers are using common language. And just to highlight again here that a culture of quality is both about sort of how to be a good citizen at school, how to be a good person, how to be positive, but it's also about academic work. So that falls under both categories. So this is kind of on that curricular side, just to give you a little bit of information about EL education. So EL is a model that has been around since the mid-90s. It was a joint venture between the Harvard School of Education and Outward Bound. So it was originally called ELOB, which was Expeditionary Learning Outward Bound. They split ways, I don't know, maybe about 15 years ago, because Outward Bound really wanted to shift their focus back to what their real mission is, which is outdoor education and wilderness experiences. So EL has just continued to grow. I think they're expanding, daily. It seems like it's a fast growing organization. They've really put a lot of energy into helping turnaround schools in that hierarchy. There's something akin to that in most states. And so they are really on a mission to help particularly impacted schools improve their performance while also, effectively holding on to kids' hearts in the process. So it's very whole student-centered, the whole child, what have you. So it's a program that, it's not where I came from. My previous school was not an EL school, but there are a lot of similarities. So I feel very familiar in working with EL. I think their focus on high quality work is something that I envied in the past. And so I appreciate having that. So then when it comes to the particular curriculum, we're using the language arts curriculum, which is called the modules. And that curriculum is a good resource for integrated learning, right? You really are learning your literacy skills, but they do that in a fashion that makes it come alive and relates it to real world experiences. and is really a foundation for what we would call learning expeditions. And I'll talk a little bit more about learning expeditions, but it's a really, multidisciplinary approach. And again, the teachers' sort of increased understanding will just continue to make it richer because, as an example, one of the units is on animal adaptations for defense mechanisms in their ecosystems. And those animals in the curriculum are animals that don't exist here. So as the teachers become more familiar and more comfortable, they can adapt it to be more focused on local animals and therefore be more engaging for the kids. But that's part of the process that we're in. Yeah. So then another feature of EL education is called learning expeditions. And for me, this is where the magic of EL happens. Like the curriculum's great, it's a good resource, but it's kind of just your entry point into EL for understanding it. So this year, the focus is a little more on expanding the understanding and the use of what we call a learning expedition. And this is a multidisciplinary approach where you're looking to try and create, engagements through solving real world problems. Like the idea that you don't have to wait for kids to become adults to be useful in the world, right? Like they can do things that actually matter on the ground right now. And it's sort of an untapped resource. So a lot of learning expeditions are tied to very real service that can be done in the community. It involves incorporating experts. So the idea of thinking like having the mindset of a historian or a scientist and having experts come in to share their knowledge and share sort of that common vernacular of their field so that kids can, that's a model, right? Like in looking at models of excellence and a culture of quality, having experts come in and share and also provide critique in a way that they can look at the students' work and give real feedback to the kids. The kids also being able to learn what a culture of quality looks like, what does their work look like. Also often involves field work, which means getting out of the school building, often, not always. You can do field work within the school setting as well, but getting them out in the world doing real work. So, we did a big training with the staff at the beginning of the year, so that both Carlson and King Murphy staff did a full day training where they did what's called a slice of an expedition. And that's them actually getting the experience from the student perspective. And that training my wife did. So she's worked in EL schools for 20 years. And so she's even more of an expert than I am on a learning expedition. So she created that and ran that for the staff. And we studied the flood of Castlewood Canyon, so which is flooded downtown Denver because Castlewood Canyon is Cherry Creek. So, and that there was a dam in Castlewood Canyon that burst, and so it was a whole exploration of that. And we met with an expert. We went out into the field, so they had that full experience. So then coming to King Murphy and being more specific about sort of what this looks like on the ground. So Mary Gordon is 4th grade. And she is currently working on a learning expedition around mining in Colorado, which is cool because obviously we've got the connection with Henderson. They did field work at the Keystone Science School, which is a fantastic facility. It's a little expensive, but we made it work. And so they got some introduction to sort of, they did some hikes and got some expert study of some mining activity that happened in the Breckenridge area. And then they've come back and they're really studying the impact of mining and on our environment, on natural history, on changes in the world, that are brought on both naturally and by human interaction with the environment. And their final product will be an informational flyer detailing sort of mining in this area. So then shifting out of the EL world into Eureka Math Squared. Also, just so you know, if you want to, their logos, both the EL logos and the Eureka are hyperlinked to their websites. So if you just click on the logo, it'll take you to the Eureka Math website or the EL website. The EL website is really expansive. There's a ton of stuff on there, but all very good. It can kind of be overwhelming, but there's good material there. They have, just one last thing about that. They have a really unique feature on their website. So Ron Berger, the same guy that wrote Culture Quality, he also wrote a book called Ethic of Excellence. He sort of single-handedly has curated the largest collection of student work, K through student work, to create models for students to be able to compare their work to when they're looking at a culture of quality. And it's just hugely expansive, and the material on there is just fantastic. There's a lot of really great resources for that. So I'm sorry to backtrack there a minute, but so Eureka Math is new for us. I was not familiar with this before I arrived here. I had some familiarity with one that we were just adopting one in Jeffco. Shoot, what's it called? I'll remember somewhere. I'll remember at 2:00 this morning. I'll text y'all what it is.
We'd appreciate it.
But it is really more of a discovery model. So it's not just practicing formulas over and over again. It really opens up the door for kids to really understand. So it's not like you would repeat, different equations in the Pythagorean theorem over and over again. You would work through a process of sort of figuring out for yourself, well, why does the Pythagorean theorem work? And then do some practice with it and looking at different ways to come to the right answer, to come to an answer. So giving kids multiple pathways to figure out, that there's more than one way to solve a problem. And we had a pretty good experience with this last year. Of course, it was new. There was a good training in January that kind of really helped open up teachers' understanding of how to use the curriculum more effectively. So I wanted to tie this one. This one actually happened in the latter half of last year, but I wanted to highlight it because it's a math-based learning expedition. And Rachel Richardson ran this learning expedition. I would want to highlight that both this expedition and the one that Mary Gordon is doing right now have been really, Lisa Cassidy has been a really great resource to help out with this. And I just would accentuate that the support to build these out, that she plays a really important role in that. But the one that Rachel did last spring that was fantastic was having the kids in 3rd grade explore the cafeteria menu and sort of trying to gauge which meals are fan favorites of the student body and which ones not so much. But using their data analysis skills to gain skills to be able to collect the data, to analyze the data, to be able to tell a story with the data, and also meeting with experts. So Steve Schwartz was fantastic in supporting the kids and sort of talking them through what are some of the, when you're really imagining what's possible, like they were like, can't we have sushi and steak, right? So sort of making it real for them that actually there are criteria, and there are budgets, and there are things that we have to consider when doing this. And they did a great job on this, and they did like taste tests, and there are some new menu items over at King Murphy as a result of the work. We had mac and cheese today, which we didn't used to have prior to this project. And their culminating was also landed with a community crew, which is the entire school coming together, which Carlson does on a daily basis. We do it about once a month. And the students presented all of their work. They presented, what they had learned and what were some of the menu items that were going to change. And that's a good example of a learning expedition that happened within the building. They didn't have to leave the school to accomplish that. You could have found ways to weave that in to leave the building, but that's kind of the direction that we're really wanting to head, is doing more of that. And I just would say last thing about learning expeditions specifically, regardless of content area, is that they're really magical and they're really labor intensive and planning intensive. So they really can't happen all the time. Like having the fallbacks of the resources of Eureka Math and the EL modules is really important, because there's periods in between the learning expeditions because you kind of have to gear up for them. There's a lot of work that goes into that to pull it off. And once you finish it up, you kind of need to be able to drop back into the regular daily lessons and what have you. Last thing I'll talk about is restorative practices. So we did apply for a grant at the end of last year. So restorative practices is something that I came with personally that I'd already used, I'd already been trained on. It does take a lot of elements that are not unique to restorative practices, but they put it together in a way that is really helpful, makes sense, has sort of gained more credibility. And it really has two components. One is sort of building the positive culture so that you minimize the amount of discipline you're going to be dealing with anyway. And that's on the left side, which is the proactive connecting circles is one of the key elements that you would use in restorative practices. Because restorative practices is more like a philosophy of how we're going to approach helping kids to be their best selves effectively. And it's based on this premise that, you know, suspension isn't always the best solution to a challenge. And, you know, they would really articulate that, you know, if a kid is struggling to learn how to read, we provide interventions that help teach them how to read. When they're struggling in math, we provide interventions to help them get better at their math skills. We should use the same mentality when we're approaching students making mistakes. That requires intervention, and we need intervention that teaches them how to become more independent, not more dependent on the system effectively. So we start that by what we would call community building circles. And this happens in crew time effectively at the beginning of days. Maybe not every day a teacher will do a circle, but it's basically an opportunity for every kid in the room to have their voice heard, to respond to a prompt. Sometimes those can just be fun or silly, but sometimes they're serious. And the more tight-knit the community is when you need to take on an issue that is challenging. So if there's problems with gossip going around, right, you've got the structure to address the concern in a very positive, proactive way because you've built the culture around kids feeling comfortable and feeling safe to be able to share, you know, personal information that matters to them. And that's the only way that you really create that deep sense of belonging. And when you're successful doing that, then the argument would be that you would have less problems to begin with, which I find to be true. And I found that to be true at my previous school as well. And when you put a bunch of kids together, there will inherently be problems. That's part of life, right? So kids make mistakes, and that's a beautiful learning opportunity. So then there's the restorative conversations, which is sort of more on the, if you were trying to draw a comparison to more of a punitive approach to discipline, so to speak, that maybe not the best word, but that's what I'll use here. So it's more of a process or a mediation, especially if it's involving kid to kid, right? Or could even be a student to staff member to staff member. I have used it in all those scenarios. But it's effectively guided by these 4 questions so I'm actually working on one right now, and I'll do pre-meetings with each student involved, and we'll go over these 4 questions together. Sometimes I might have our mental health provider with me to help work through this. And I'm just asking these 4 questions. What happened? What were the effects of that, or who was affected? What's the emotional impact of that? What part of that could you have done differently, or what can you take responsibility for? And then what are we going to do to create a solution so that the kid is part of creating the solution? And so I'll do pre-conferences with both parties, you know, students usually, just to sort of go through it so that they can think about it and they can be more concise about what they want to say and feel like they've thought this through rather than just winging it on the spot. And that also provides for me, if it feels like it might not be productive to do this, we can stop the process at any point. It's also completely voluntary. I would never have kids participate in it that the kid didn't want to or the parent didn't want to. The chances of it being effective in that scenario is basically none. And it's not really ethically right to do that. But most people, you know, do participate willingly, and I find it to be pretty successful. I wouldn't say it's 100%, because nothing's 100%, but more often than not, it comes out with a result that the kids have buy-in for, they have stake in, you know, making sure that they adjust their behavior based on these honest conversations that they're going to have. And those are skills that they can take with them in their life. This is how it is similar to an intervention that you would do for reading or math or whatever. Because, you could have those questions in a discussion with your spouse, for example. It might be effective to sort of talk things through in a way like this. So I find it to be very helpful, and again, but not perfect. Nothing is perfect. But so that's it. Those are the sort of woven together curriculum components that both King Murphy and Carlson are using. We're pretty mirrored. We just did that round of walkthroughs, I'm sure you have heard about. And I would say I was pleasantly surprised at how similar the approaches were. So kids will now be coming here with fairly consistent programming between each school. Obviously, there's variation that exists based on your population, based on Lorraine's leadership style versus my leadership style, the staff that you have, et cetera. But overall, they're fairly consistent. So kids will have that common language, not only within King Murphy, but between King Murphy and Carlson. So yeah, question?
I was just gonna ask a question about the restorative practices. So do you find that or have you been able to use it even when an action is pretty severe, in the sense of like what would normally be pretty severe consequences? Like how do you handle something that you're like somebody would be suspended for, right?
Yeah, I've used it for that, but not at King Murphy.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, I just haven't had that kind of discipline
needed to,
at King
right?
Murphy. Yeah, which is fantastic. I mean, there are issues that I would be very hesitant to use it for. Sexual harassment would be one that I would steer clear of, because I think if you're the victim in that situation, that could be re-traumatizing by using that for that particular process. But I mean, this is derived from the court system. Restorative justice is what this comes from. This is an adaptation for school. So they're using it for legal matters, right? So, but at my previous school, I did use it for things that were a little more serious, say like possession of marijuana or something like that, like where I used them for things like that. I would say sexual harassment and threats are two that I would steer clear of, because of the impact on the victim. If the victim were really advocating for the use of that, I might consider, in consultation with the family and everybody involved and a mental health professional in the building, I might consider it, but typically not on those ones. And I think there are people who will use them in those, but I would shy away from that.
It's traffic out.
Then my other question is this something that you're training the educators on?
Yeah.
Or is this something that you do if something
No.
happens?
So the grant was for 10,000, and we have some training that we've already done some training at the beginning of the year, and there'll be more to come. So all both elementaries spent half a day in here doing the initial training. The circles, obviously the community building component of it is definitely being done by the teachers. And I do think in problem solving in the rooms that teachers are using more of that language. There is a time and a place where the teacher maybe doesn't have time, or the situation is more persistent or something like that, where having my sort of experience with it is helpful, but teachers can pick this up really quickly. Like I said, it's not really rocket science. Like that's just a standard mediation that you would do between two kids. It just gives, again, it's that same thing as the curricular resources, where now there's a common language to it, right? So kids are now familiar with, what happened, what can I take responsibility for, that kind of thing. And that can play out in pretty small scale stuff in the classroom. Do you want to say anything about that? Rachel, just use of restorative type conversations on a daily basis in the classroom. The question was, do I just do the problem solving one? And my take is no, I don't.
No.
But if the issue is bigger and needs more.
Sure.
More.
It's kind of on the students to
Yeah.
figure out. And my takeaways are that restoration needs to be meaningful, not like, sorry, bye.
Yeah.
And also it can be very time consuming.
Yeah.
But it also can be on the fly, a short conversation.
So
Get it started with some students at this point.
Yeah, I would say it's a combination.
And did you say that the training was just the elementary school?
It was, yeah,
Educators?
at this point.
And do you
Um,
think that's something that will expand to middle school and high school educators? I think it's
Well,
helpful in that place.
the trainer, who's working with us is Jen Gallegos, and she's fantastic. I would highly recommend her, but I think the 10 grand in the grant is pretty essential to be able to pay for that resource. So I would be encouraging of the high school and middle school to consider
I
that,
thought
but
that they,
they'd have to be
I thought that they did.
It'd have
I could
to
be
be
wrong about that. I thought they did.
covered cost-wise.
I thought they did at Stone.
No, it's just the two elementary.
Was it just 2 separate? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible Brandy has that experience. It's not uncommon these days in schools to have training on that. So she might be using that from her own experience. I mean, I was using it last year without, just because I brought that with me and I believe in it. I think it works. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right, sorry, I talked for a long.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me
Thank you.
brag on my school and thanks for all. the
Congratulations on the
support
big
on resources.
score improvement. It's awesome.
Yeah, now the challenge is maintaining.
Yeah, you gotta keep that up.
I mean, and I.
Days for days.
The reality is that maintaining is harder because I went through this, like my previous school, there was a point where we were like a turnaround school. And so we went through, that was my first year as a principal there. I inherited a turnaround and that's really intense.
Mhm.
And we were able to bring up the scores very quickly, but maintaining it, we did maintain them during the course of the remainder of my career, but it was challenging. And it did fluctuate because you're in a range between 60 and 100. 60 is the cut for performance. I think it's 60. Yeah, I'd have to double check that, but it's approximately 60. So you're in a range. And as long as you're in that range, I feel like, you're good. Like, because it's solely based on test scores. So, and that's a snapshot and that's valuable information, but I think there's a lot more about a school that tells that it is a quality place to be and a place to learn and grow and all those kind of things. So I think we have to pay it mind and give it its due place, but it shouldn't be our sole mission to do well in test scores. But I do think maintaining is going to be an interesting challenge to see how that goes. So, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Superintendent
Speaking
update.
of updates, and you have these on your cover sheets that way, but a little bit of the cross-country team at state, boys and girls, the football team at a state game got moved to Sunday that way, so they were eliminated that day, but good, and volleyball had a good season as well, so moving into winter sports now, or whatever you want to call them, middle school boys basketball has started. High school basketball will start here fairly soon, games coming up at the end of the month that way, so, and wrestling with that as well. The city is utilizing the old Carlson gym for the painting and the mural. Talked to Steve Tominakers and Sadie Schultz, had a meeting with them and kind of worked it out that they could go there, use it a couple days a week. The BEST grant, I met with Kelly and Carrie Ann last week one day, and with Aaron, we did submit information for the BEST grant for roofs. We're looking at other things, kind of see there's different things there, safety, security, air quality, new schools, roofs or something that I asked about. He said, yeah, that gets funded sometimes. And so we're going to put in, the application's not in yet. We just basically a letter of intent out there. So I'm going to look at probably the King Murphy roof to help pay for that way. So just how that works, if they would give us $100,000, we would have to match that with about $300,000. Just as an example, it's kind of an example that way. Some other things there. Parent-teacher conferences were much better attended at the middle school, high school this year, according to several people mentioned that. Partly possibly because they had some other activities going on that way too for parents. Multi-tiered system of support, kind of a differentiated instruction that way, but really looking at, meeting kids' needs, what do they need more so. Sunny Vincent led that. They had a meeting with our last PD day. She's been working on a handbook for that, getting that going that way. That is happening already at King Murphy and at Carlson. Looks a little different that way, probably, but still the same point. Students struggling, what are we gonna do for that student? common sense, we need to do something for that student or those students. That way too, look at our instruction, which will be an ongoing thing. The district is gonna host our winter party and social. Some of you had mentioned that to me. We really need to have that again. You had it last year. We're gonna do it at Tommyknockers this year. Cost is a little less. That way, based on some input, we're not gonna have a sit-down meal. It's kind of going to be a come as you want. That way, if you wanna get there at 5 and stay till 8, you can. You wanna pull in at 6 o'clock and leave at 6:15, you can do that too. You know what I mean? So, but it'll be appetizers, more finger foods and stuff like that. That way, we can talk later on about if the board members want to contribute to that again. That way, some different businesses, different organizations are doing that way too. So we can talk about that at the business meeting. That it's not a school. We will fund it with some school funds too. That way, looking at a cost being a lot less than last year. That way too, just some budget things. Second grade class at Carlson will be adding, or actually has added, or will be adding fully. So 0.55 time, Siri Lewis, working over there based on increasing numbers up to, we started the year with 24, don't quote me on those numbers, at 24, eventually we're at 28 right now. So that's a good thing. Increased enrollment is always a good thing. But we need some extra help for that way too. Special ed, I talked about as well. We'll be adding that come January. Weather. As I said here, one every superintendent's favorite topics, no matter where you're at that way. We had some students absent those days that we can kind of see the other two. At King Murphy, we had about 33% of the students out on that Wednesday, 24% at Carlson, and then about 26% at the middle school, high school. Now, granted, not all those students were because of the weather, but you can figure a chunk of them, a good chunk of them were that way. Kind of communicate some things there that way. And we're looking to develop eventually a long-range facilities planning committee. I think that will kind of take place in the CAD eventually and really start looking for the future in that regard. Not that, we're just finishing up Carlson, some other things with the bond right now, but have to start looking long range. What are those other things out there? And, it may not be glamorous, some things, but we have to do some things that way. Just like a roof, it's not glamorous, but you don't have a roof, you have problems. So those are the basic things there. And then actually Kristen and Brandy and I went to a career fair a few weeks ago that way. And I'll pass this around to everybody. You can see what we handed out to the applicants there. Kind of interesting thing put together. Actually, it wasn't put together this year, but put together in the past. But you can look at that and I'll take it over there to them for you to take a look at that. But we are looking for a high school math teacher right now because one is leaving. So have some interest in that. Hopefully we'll see where that goes. So that's kind of an update overall of what I have. So thank you.
Do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
Then I'll invite Leah to come up, visit with us.
Thank you.
So I definitely got some questions from Marcy. I don't know if you have more questions following that.
don't.
Do you want to walk through any of them?
I just didn't know if we should just go over them quickly. I'm clear on everything, but just to make it on the record.
Yeah, agree.
Nope, it's good to go over.
Do you want me just to ask when you can give your answer or?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Let's see here, Fund 10, page 9, Clear Creek High School account fund for AP exams are $742.25, and then career development for $3,751.60.
Okay, so I think you were a little unclear on CCHS activity fund that's managed here at the high school. And so we basically passed the funds we received from the state to the high school activity fund for them to manage. My thought is that the AP exams are subsidized but not paid for in whole, with the number only being 742. The career development program, there's a list of qualified expense, but basically it provides financial incentives for the school district and charter schools that encourage high school student grades 9 through 12 to compete complete qualified industry credential programs, pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeships. Tier 2 would be workplace training programs or internships, and then Tier 3 computer science advanced placement courses. So basically, Stacy kind of is more in tune with those students, the needs, and who is actually involved in these programs. And then she works with Becky historically, Sunny now as well. Yeah, and I do have an email out to Stacy to get a little more clarity on how those are managed, but because there will be another 11,000 that we just received from the state that you'll see passed through as
So
well.
it's kind of for the
So
state
that
to our
number
general
is
fund, we're not giving
definitely,
it into this account for her to pay.
exactly.
Fund 10, page 13 for the WIN Communications, it's a retainer for marketing. I was just clarifying that this is for the early enrollment campaign that we've discussed. And then I just asked how much money is left in our marketing budget for the year.
Okay, yep, and beginning budget 25,000, cost to date 8,693. There was a little carryover from the prior year to the tune of 3,000 and some odd dollars, leaving us a remaining balance of $16,307.
Fund 10, page 14, Jefferson Center for Mental Health, it was $99,184.88. And I just asked how often we pay this.
And so that is an annual invoice. It includes coverage at both elementary schools, the middle school and high school. Last year, this was primarily covered by ESSER grants, but this year it's hitting the general fund. From what I could see, it was probably only partially budgeted in the general fund. And I do have some concerns on ESSER funds that are no longer available that might flow through to the general fund. So as we go through budgeting season, we really need to be mindful of those items. Hopefully, we also received some carry forward grants, so that might wash out. We'll see, but we'll just keep an eye on that. And then as far as budgeting goes, just keep everybody really focused on wants and needs are always going to exceed what CDE is giving to us. So not just accepting all of our programs as they are today, but just really evaluating, the cost versus the impact. And we'll have to kind of just keep that into perspective.
I think if I can just add to that with ESSER funds, just make sure, ESSER funds were, I'll say, one-time money.
Yes.
That way, coming to us, you use it for staffing or something like that, ESSER funds stop, still it's staff. I'm not saying there's nothing need there yet. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there, but we always have to recognize that. I think that's kind of what Lee and I have been talking about too, just recognizing, it's for a multitude of things and what is it that we, because I think this is a very valuable service. We talk about the ratio. We have a good ratio, and that's good. We need that.
And it might be an exercise we need to do too, is just to go back and look at what was all covered in ESSER and then just double check that it's been budgeted or not. This is the first time that I saw it come up where it's like, ooh, we got a partial budget that matched what was allocated to the schools, but there seemed to be a little bit of some missing information there.
The next is Fund 10, page 14, Kumar and Associates soil testing at all the school buildings. It was $77.08 and 77 cents. And I just asked how often do we pay it? And is it a state requirement or what triggered it?
So it's not an ongoing expense. It's not a state requirement. But the EPA had reached out to us, I believe, last fiscal year. Mike Gass, in reviewing the communication, told Aaron, I think this is a good idea, good due diligence to have. And it's not necessarily required, but it's recommended. And then I also just added that the soil testing results concluded that heavy metal levels are below the threshold for action according to EPA standards. So I wouldn't anticipate that we need to do that test for many years to come.
I wonder, is that noted, can we note that somewhere so that,
We don't budget for it again.
okay, I just don't want
Yeah.
someone else to be like, hey, we should do this, and we already.
No, I think,
Aaron has some records on that too,
Yeah.
that he's keeping up there.
Okay.
So that's along with some other things, but I agree, we don't want to be 3-4 years from now and all of us forget.
Yeah.
I wonder if we've
Right,
ever done
right.
that before, you know, I mean, seriously, because it's not like that doesn't ever happen.
Right.
I mean, for anybody. that
Well,
is.
and anytime if we have staffing changes or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, we'll probably just need to evaluate our facilities, maintenance, the files, how are we structuring that? And how, if someone were new to walk into the building, that they could, this information is not lost.
Next was just Fund 10, page 15. It was cash in bank for $47.40 and 80 cents to Rebecca McCarthy, just asking if it was for coaching and to clarify.
So it was for coaching. We used to pay all the coaches with paper check. We switched to direct deposit. She was somebody who had old direct deposit information in there, and so it got rejected. So the expense had been recorded on the general ledger. She didn't have a direct deposit, so I couldn't reinitiate, or she didn't have a bank account. So we issued her a check and used the cash as the general ledger clearing account.
Fund 22, page 1, Clear Creek Schools Foundation, District Staff Development, Crown Plastics for $722.12, and then sandwich check for $665.03. I just was asking what it was. I thought it was probably for the Rec and Tech class, but it was coded under staff development, so I was just clarifying.
And it looks like sandwich tech was typo for snow tech. Maybe it was right before lunch, I'm not sure. Yeah, I read that and I was like, the location and description selected for the grant is really incorrect when it was set up. But with the rural co-action grant, it's sunsetting in October. So we just, for that particular grant, said we've reported on it this way.
And I think you said
For
that last time. too.
14 months. We're just gonna leave it, and then moving forward, we'll make sure that we're getting things set up correctly and we're questioning all the coding. I noticed when reading the reports, there's some like old and some of the descriptions look a little funny. So we're gonna audit that as well. And it is because we are really reviewing the account roots and what that means. And so we're activating a lot of inactive accounts, creating new accounts. So there will probably be a lot of there's just some work and cleanup to do there.
The next one was Fund 22, page 1. It was tuition reimbursement, $4,175 to Melissa English. And I was just asking, was it covered by a grant? And then I was just questioning how it's determined the educators get, how do we
Determine who gets
Right.
those funds.
And I also asked if it was something we could use for marketing or negotiations.
Yeah, so the expenditures relate to educator tuition reimbursement, and they're covered by the Rural Co-action grant. I said it's not something that we can really offer to educators, knowing like we have exactly this much money to provide PD or additional education to our teachers every year. It's going to be dependent on certain grants, like for instance, the Rural Co-action grant is no longer available to us. It's part of the ESSER string, and so I think it'd be difficult to include that in any negotiation. As far as how the opportunities are typically handled, an email sent out inviting the teachers that if they'd like to participate in any graduate level courses to basically submit an interest form, and then we basically try to focus on core content areas, so who's in line with that. Occasionally, we fund it outside of the core content areas, but it really just depends on who applies, what resources are available, etc.
And then last was Fund 41, page 1, Clear Creek Schools Foundation. It was $382 for increased insurance, and then legal fees for ECC, which was $1,190. I was just asking if that was something that the district was paying for, and if so, how come?
Yeah, so this is another pass-through. We really have two for the foundation right now. One involves the design and the construction of the ECE build-out, and the other, it's smaller in nature, around $20,000, probably now more like 18 or 15, but it seems to be like some sort of educational grant. But this one is approximately, I think, a balance of $90,000, and that we received the cash in fiscal year 23-24. We're basically reimbursing him as he incurs qualified expenses. So it's kind of slow to kick off. It could be, in one request, a large sum of money as he really gets moving with pre-construction, and in the event that it would have to move to the construction as well.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else have questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Leah. The lobbying update, I know you've got some other notes too, let me just look at the quick. I shared kind of the few items that we were voting on, and a good many of them were pulled. So I know Rachel had expressed some concerns around the increased number of hours, and that was one that didn't even make it to the floor to vote. So doesn't mean that they won't bring it back in December or something to discuss, but accreditation and accountability task force was pulled again because we didn't have the report, so that'll come back in December. GED counting toward graduation rate failed. The increased required instructional hours was pulled. The mental health measure passed. The mill levy override equity failed, which I think is kind of disappointing, but I would love for that one to be raised up again because I have a better understanding of that one now. Thank you, Kelly. And then updates to the Colorado Public Schools Contract Act did pass. We've got some notes on some of the things that Governor Polis.
Yeah, I put in the
Yeah.
PowerPoint presentation of things that were presented earlier on November 1st, actually. And then you also see there on the front page, it talked about the schools with that, what impact it would have on us. It's negative $300-some thousand, $302,000 now. Talking to Leah, some of the rural school stuff and things like that, we may end up not being that far off of what we were. But it's always concerning when new legislation is proposed or put out there that has a negative impact, because you don't know if the other things are gonna hold up over time, and you just get concerned about that. So that's my whole point here, just recognizing that funds are limited, as always, in probably every state, everything like that. So just recognizing that. But I think we'll be able to make up some of that through other ways too, so, which is good. But I don't have anything else on lobbying necessarily, but I just wanted to share that information with you.
Do you have any notes?
I think, my only notes are I've touched base with Rachel, with rural schools, and Megan, or Michelle. And, because we're members, they give us information. I think the areas that may be interesting for us over time is that mental health piece. And what that really is about citing those facilities and making sure that they are being cited in responsible ways to ensure that if you have sex offenders living there, that they are within X appropriate distance from schools, like they would have to anywhere else. This rose up from a North Glen situation, so they will be pursuing legislation around that this year. I don't think it's as impactful for us in Clear Creek County, but in Jefferson County, for instance, one of these facilities is being cited in unincorporated Jefferson County, which is right across the street from an elementary school, and nobody seems to know that's happening. And so this is how they're trying to stop that from happening. So I think it's a good one, and we should pay attention and be supportive from that piece. And I think the other places that we're gonna have to really think about providing our own expertise and testifying is when it does come to anything related to the implementing the School Finance Act, which is going to be implemented more slowly than we originally thought because we don't have any money. And so it's going to take more years than was originally planned. And I think when that happens, it starts to erode a little bit. And so I think we need to just make sure that our voice is there. But between rural schools and CASB, I think we're well supported on that. So, and I think this is a result of our terrible budget situation at the state level. And so, I mean, while it's super disappointing, I think it's all the more reason that we need to work really hard on enrollment.
Thank you. Sure. Erica, would you like to take the lead or would you
Sure.
like? Yes.
So
On the
we have
memorialization.
been meeting, several times we have met to talk about the crisis response handbook and how we are implementing that, within our school district. One of the things that we wanted to bring, we are going to talk about that, the whole workbook, the crisis response next month with the board. But right now, we wanted to kind of get an approval on memorialization guidelines. I did email the board the most current guideline, because what is in our packet is actually from before our meeting yesterday. And so I just wanted you to be able to see actually what it looks like today. Because when we met as a group yesterday, we did do some updates on and removing certain things. So just know that what's in the packet is not the most current. And so what we have determined, and Scott, Kristen, Tom, and I, out of who is here tonight, we're all involved in these meetings. What we have determined is that it is better as a school district to stick with guidelines versus a policy, because every situation is different. And so we feel like this is really something that will be up to ultimately to Tom and the building leader with how we might approach these circumstances. And so, I encourage you to look through the memorialization guidelines that I did send to you. There are some interesting things that we decided to take out. So just so you understand where this came from, this guideline here, that we edited came from Jeffco. And so we have made some changes based on what we feel is more suited for a small school district versus what Jeffco does in a very, very large district. And so, for example, we changed, so they have different guidelines around what they allow for memorials, and we feel that it's not appropriate in a small school district. For example, specifically under the unacceptable school memorials and activities, if you compare what you see in your book or in your packet to what we actually kept in our guidelines, we actually removed that whole section. Because the only thing we felt was pertinent in that section was the all school assemblies, and how that would still be something that is up to the building leader and up to Tom, if we feel like an all school assembly is an appropriate thing or not an appropriate thing. Otherwise, we took out pretty much everything as unacceptable. So monuments, markers on school property, because we already have these existing memorials in place and we don't want to change what has been a part of our community for so long. And so we took those out. And so if anyone feels differently, please say so now. And then I think we did change a little bit, in talking about memorialization after a suicide. We changed it a little bit because there was a little bit of concern about kind of there being a stigma in treating a suicide differently from, any other type of death. And so we changed the wording slightly under the section where it says, consider the following when planning on how to support your school community to grieve in a healthy, safe, and helpful manner. And so they had, do not make a permanent memorial following a suicide. And we changed it to, do not glorify, highlight, or accentuate the event in any way. And kind of a note under that permanent memorials following a suicide are highly discouraged. So we don't want to say flat out period, no. But we are discouraging it just because we don't want to glorify that and then potentially create a situation where other students may follow suit, because of the glorification of the event. So we did change that a little bit. And then I think the rest of that stayed the same. Oh, we did remove, like I had an original comment about, does this apply to a small school district if we were to close school or dismiss early in the event of a funeral? Because like I remember, the reason I made that comment is because when I went to high school, we had a student pass away and we did close school because everybody was going to the funeral. And so we had discussed that kind of in detail yesterday and determined that we would not close school, even if it meant that there was a quarter of the students here. We want to make sure that we're honoring everybody's choices in that situation and not closing school and then making a student feel like they need to attend if it isn't something that is appropriate for them to do. So we would just make sure that staffing is appropriate in that instance and that, we have teachers available to fill in for teachers who would want to go to a funeral and that sort of thing. Let's see. As far as diplomas are concerned, so this was an interesting conversation that we had where basically Brandy had prior experience with this and her belief is that we would not award like an honorary diploma, that it really is if the student actually completed, like say something happened right before graduation, like the week before graduation or something like that, then we would still award the diploma to the family. But there are a few things that we would want to do, like say during a graduation ceremony, maybe we have an empty chair with like, the sash and stuff over it, but not in alphabetical order because we don't want to make the students who are sitting next to that empty chair uncomfortable. So it would be kind of on its own in memorial to that person. But we would only do this in the instance of somebody passing away during their senior year. It wouldn't be like if someone who passed away in 5th grade would have graduated all these years later, we're not going to have that empty chair, just to kind of keep it appropriate for the moment. Any questions about that? So we're not gonna change.
One small question just about diplomas. I'm having all the feels, by the way.
Yes.
It's taking me back to a really hard period of my life. So my cousin passed away in the summer between our junior year and our senior year. What would you recommend in those instances? No diploma because they had not completed. But in his particular case, he had the credits. So he did get a diploma still?
Yes, so if they complete the graduation credits, they would still get a diploma. So it has to be that they actually completed the credits. So in that case, yes, he would have received the diploma.
And there's probably something different we talk about a week away from graduation or, there's to be a little bit of a give.
Right, like, did you earn it
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
so.
I mean, are they recognized at all if there's not a diploma? I mean, I just can't imagine being a parent and
Yes.
not having your kid acknowledged.
Yes, so that's where the empty seat still comes into play, but the family wouldn't receive the diploma if all the credits weren't completed for graduation. So 2 separate kind of pieces there, not necessarily always connected. Do you want to add anything to that?
On that part, no, I think that's pretty accurate for what we talked about. I think, like I said, that week before that, 2 months before, you probably have earned the credits or you're real close. So there's to be a little bit of flexibility there a little bit, but honoring people with that chair as well.
It could even be like if a staff member is lost, again,
Yes.
an empty chair for that staff member. Like it's the same concept. It doesn't necessarily need to be a student, but someone lost in that year being memorialized in that way during graduation, if that makes sense. Okay. And then we took out the part, again, and I kind of already talked about this, but if we had a student who passed away in elementary school, once their graduation year comes, we aren't going to necessarily bring that back up again. You know, we will have handled the memorialization and honoring of that student during that time when the death originally happened.
As you're looking at it, I would just add that we tried to, we used Jeffco's as a model. But as Eric had mentioned, we modified it to fit our district's need, which is much different than Jeffco. Size, familiarity with students, families, it's different that way. And there's probably not a right way of doing some things either. But we want to allow some flexibility where there is some room for that as well.
Yeah,
But we had some really good discussions about a variety of things that way and experiences and stuff. So.
I mean, again, these are just guidelines, right? We're not asking for a policy. And we do understand, that things can potentially change. Like as circumstances come up, we may see our errors in our ways in these guidelines, maybe not, but it may be possible. So, again, these are just guidelines. And Scott, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on based on our conversation.
I appreciate having a frame of reference, because when you're in the middle of an event like that, to not have to come up with everything from scratch. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing it and what have you. And I do think that, oftentimes what Jeffco does is really applicable here. But to have a beginning framework to work from and some of their expertise, because and just the sheer number of students means more number of incidents, so they have more direct experience with this. But I thought the work was very, we had to think through a lot of really hard subjects. So I think what we've got, what we came up with is solid and allows enough. I completely agree with guidelines over policy, because policy sometimes ties your hands in ways that you don't really want them to be tied, especially in a situation like this. So I think it's just a nice balance between some guiding support without being, you have to do it lockstep in a particular way. It can be modified to adapt to each particular school community.
So again, I just sent you what we had come up with yesterday. So we would like to have kind of, a thumbs up from the board with these guidelines, even though it's not a policy. I would like to have input from the board. So maybe if we could have input by the end of the week, if you have any input, please send it by the end of the week to Tom and I, just so that, we can take those things into consideration, because we would like to have the crisis response handbook finalized before our next, meetings. And so, just so that it's in place, just in case something happens. So if you have comments, please just shoot Tom and I an email and let us know. That would be great.
Thank you for all of the work that you've done on this and the committee that you had working with. Policy. We've got some policies under second read, JICDE and JICDE2. Bullying prevention and education, and then the investigation form. Were there any additional community comments?
So you kind of see the magenta color and the orange color from the two different times we revised it based on input. That hasn't changed since our last meeting. It's the second read. Would be approved in our business meeting next week. That way for bullying prevention. You see I had one student, I guess I shouldn't say there were no comments, but one student comment from one of the students. Yeah, so just so you kind of want to, sure Maggie got it, actually.
Any questions or comments on that?
Looks good.
Thank you. Bringing the students in. All right, policy JLCE, first aid and emergency medical care. I think again, don't have any comments on any of these, correct? Okay. I won't ask individually then.
Looks like all of our stuff was well captured.
Yes.
I don't have any questions.
All right, then policy KDE, crisis management. And again, that one was just shalls to wills, so. All right. Policies on first read.
Person was the,
Student interrogations.
and there's some orange in there too, based after the reds that way, with comments from public feedback.
Okay.
And I haven't had anything from the students yet. Anything from students yet, the student dress code, that's the one that I'm kind of curious for, so just to be honest, I'm more curious about that one than,
Yeah.
I'm curious about both of them, but student dress code. So,
And those have been shared with them. I think I
Yes.
shared them, I think you shared them, so.
Maybe just a question, on the, JIH, the interrogations in the orange that's added in the third paragraph. What would we consider to be significantly developmentally disabled? Do we have a definition for that? Does that put us in some tricky water with that kind of a language?
There's language there, but maybe there's a way to make that clearer.
can try to make that clear. That was actually language that we added, or I added, I guess. But you bring up a good question, what is it?
I mean, and then could they
I think
go, well, I am,
I
and you
think
didn't reach out.
I think the point of the feedback on that question, if I, or on this policy, I remember was making sure that someone who's not able to comprehend what's happening, that they know, that a parent will be called. So,
I would wonder if
I think
any
it's,
student who's on an IEP or
That's what I was
504,
wondering too, yeah.
that then there's no question, if there is a documentation in place for that student to have supports, that their adult needs to be there.
I mean, it does just seem like that puts you in really tricky water. And maybe some
I
way
think
of,
it's more of a judgment thing, the way it's written. If you have
It is.
your 504, that kind of clarifies it.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of,
Yes.
Yeah.
it kind of, you know, it kind of defines that way.
I just think that would be helpful as people are kind of looking that
Makes sense.
through to just see what that means and how it applies. And then the other concern I have is just would you get pushback from other parents and say, you should call me before you interrogate my child, whether they are on an IEP or not? I'm their parent.
I think it goes back to what Scott said about the immortalization of crisis handbook. It's like, anytime there's a policy,
Right.
you run into what words are in that policy. Now, the way that people in this room may interpret something, or the way I interpret something is going to be different than someone else. And I think that's a fairly common thing in all honesty. So, no, yeah.
Well, if they're under 18, wouldn't an adult be there?
If something happens, I think what Bo would typically do, or whatever, we would typically contact the parent anyway. That's kind of a common practice.
Yeah,
You're gonna
so
contact.
I feel like this really is specifically for those students that maybe are older.
I think it may have
Get
been
into that grade.
Yeah. I can put IEP in Title IV and I think there's probably other times too where you would recognize
Severity or
You know, just the severity. That's the way, I guess, my experience with men as principal superintendent, it's like, let's call.
Yeah.
I mean, just because it's not gonna hurt anything.
Right.
It's not gonna hurt
Smooth
anything.
it over, but just
Mhm.
unnecessary,
Yeah.
Either.
You know, there's no reason to cause more problems based on this problem.
Right.
No, seriously, it's like,
Yeah.
let's deal with this, but let's get everybody involved and things are gonna happen the way things are gonna happen, but let's make sure people are involved. So maybe I can reword that whole thing a little bit that way. Makes sense that way too.
Well, and should it be maybe at the superintendent or principal's discretion beyond IEP 504?
Well, I think it has to
Something
be
like
the
that.
principal's discretion that way too, of what they need to do. Obviously, if something happens at an elementary school, that's much different than something happening at a high school in regard to pay. I mean, I shouldn't say it's much different, but I mean, I think the aspects would be, contacting parents would be, really just to let them know, hey, here's what's going on. And in our society right now, kids are probably, are probably texting or calling their parents anyway, I mean, beforehand, but I think the school making that contact would make good sense in that regard. So I'll try to reword this a little bit without next time.
Thank you.
The JICA student dress code.
I really appreciate that this has been edited to be a little bit less gender specific. It feels like dress codes are always geared to what girls should or should not wear, so I appreciate that this is a little more neutral on that.
Any other thoughts or comments? Seeing none. I think I saw that George was online, or did he leave us?
He's still there, I think. He's still there, I think, so.
So see his bubble.
He's here. George, are you still there? All right, can you try talking to you? Yes, we can.
Good evening.
Well, hey, George, thanks for being here. I just felt this was important for me, if nothing else. That way, I think it's important for the board members too. I did enclose a copy of what was at CASB of board roles. I thought that was appropriate. I shared that with George as well. I'm not going to go through that. All that was a link in that way, but I think just a couple things that I'll highlight here. The difference between a citizen and a school board member. All of a sudden, when you become a school board member, it's a little different that way. Not that you're not a citizen anymore, but I think that's what George has talked about as well. But I'm not going to go through a whole lot else, George. As far as this activity, we're going to do it on the screen there that you're at, actually. But you want to kind of lead us into this a little bit, or?
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, good to see you, Tom. It's really been fun working with you through the Rural Superintendent Academy. Lori, thanks for the communication today, getting this all set up. My intent was actually to show up there live and in person, but the way my schedule worked out today, I actually left Alamosa like at 1:30 p.m. and it would have been real tight getting there, and then I would have needed to drive home from there. And so what I did is I shared with Tom that there's a way to do this activity digitally, and it's actually going to be kind of fun, I think. And here's my attitude on it. First of all, is a year ago at the CASB convention, I had the pleasure of working with the board, and prior to it, actually, by interviewing each of you individually to help build your operations norms. And my hope and perhaps understanding is as you went into your superintendent search, you carried those operations norms forward, and you've been doing your best to follow them. And the thing about norms is every once in a while, because we're human, we stumble, and then we try to pick ourselves back up and go back to adhering to them. Where we never got last year was clearly defining the role of your superintendent and your board. And here's this is just George Welsh's opinion about what that landscape looks like in Colorado. The average school district has something in policy somewhere that says, here's like the code of ethics for the board, and maybe this is what the superintendent ought to be doing. And I'll bet if Tom looks close enough in his contract that there's going to be a list of nebulous things that he's supposed to do. CASB does a pretty good job of trying to outline the role of the board and especially try to contrast that with what the superintendent should do. What I've done, and you guys are getting pretty close to the 40th district that I'll have done this with, is I decided to just make a bunch of Post-it notes that say all the things that I can think of that a school district does, and then determine whose realm that is. And what you're going to see that Tom will be leading you through is a process where you look at each Post-it note digitally and you say, for example, approve a budget. You got to decide, is this something that the superintendent does? Is this something that the board does? Is this a shared responsibility of a school district? And for about 90% of the decisions you'll make, it's okay wherever you want to put these Post-its. There's a few things that if you have them land in the wrong part of the Venn diagram, I will say, well, that's really not legal in Colorado. And we'll talk about that and we'll encourage you to move it. But the end result, what you get is when you look at the circles that you'll see on the digital whiteboard is the shared responsibilities between you and Tom, and those responsibilities that you say are strictly to the superintendent ultimately make a role description for your superintendent. And if Tom would, and you guys would like me to take the next step after doing this, we're just going to sort them tonight. I'm going to screen capture it. I'm going to push back to you a defined role of the superintendent, a defined role of the board. And if you want to then take your superintendent role and build an evaluation process that will allow you to evaluate Tom based on what you now say his role is in the district, I'm happy to do that and support you through that first implementation of that. So that's the goal here. And Tom, it looks like you moved my circles around on the whiteboard, or maybe Lori did. Maybe she's better at this than I am.
Oh, yeah, you did see it. So I'm going to share the screen right now. We can try to get it so in kind of what I did is, before you sent me the list, I typed them all up. So I have a nice little sheet here that all of them have with things. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read them off, and then board members, you can say where it should go. And it's going to look like this here. And I have to make sure the
Tom, are you in the document right now?
Yes, I am.
And so, for example, if I'm grabbing a purple one, can you see me move it?
Yep.
Okay, so this one, I'm just going to give you an example. This one says, ensure all staff evaluated. The question is that the superintendent's job? Would it move up to blue? Is it the board's job? Or would you consider it in Clear Creek a shared job? And so that's what you're going to do with each of these Post-its. Just going to move them where you think they are. And I've got a perfect bird's eye view to watch that. And so I'll watch you do it. And if I catch you doing some things that I'm a little bit concerned about, I'm going to chime in. Okay.
All right. So I'm since the board members can't actually read them on the screen, so I'm going to read them. Then you're just going to tell me where to go. Okay. I mean, on this page, not literally. Okay. So the purple is the board. The joint is the green, and the superintendent's blue. So facilities master planning. I'm not going to say them. Just let you guys tell me. Facilities master planning.
Board.
Advocate for resources.
Both.
Shared, okay. Secure grants.
Both.
Collaborate with external entities. Ensure annual audit conducted.
Superintendent.
Okay, and Tom, if you'll pause for a second, so far so good, wonderful. And what I wanted to make sure that the board thought about as they're pointing you where to put the Post-it is really concentrate on the verb. Conducting the audit versus approving the audit, for example, becomes obvious, right? And so as Tom reads every post-it to you, try to really focus on what the verb is to maybe guide you to where you might want to put it.
All right, maintain facilities.
That's you.
Superintendent.
Develop and administer local assessments.
Superintendent.
Super.
Analyze student achievement.
Both.
Report student achievement to the public.
Both.
Use facilities effectively.
It's
Superintendent.
Yeah.
Dismiss or non-renew employees.
Superintendent.
Recommend staffing levels. Go ahead, George.
superintendent.
I was going to jump in where it says dismiss and non-renew employees. I thought someone said superintendent. Legally, an employee is not dismissed or non-renewed until the board has acted on it. I have no problem with a board putting it in shared because the superintendent ultimately has to present the case for the dismissal or the non-renewal. And so I'm always most comfortable if it either lives in shared or with the board ultimately, because it doesn't happen if the board doesn't vote to approve that. And you guys probably do that in the form of a consent agenda.
I think it's kind of my mind's kind of a shit. The board, ultimately, that consent agenda, you make the final decision. And it's like, no, that's wrong. So anyway, ensure all staff evaluated.
Superintendent.
Except that you're a staff person.
Except for the superintendent, but yeah, I like that you put it there in the superintendent. And if the staff is not getting evaluated, you just gotta hold the superintendent accountable for that.
Recommend staffing levels.
Superintendent.
Procure supplies, materials, and equipment.
Superintendent.
Review and accept annual audit.
Board.
Administer state assessments.
Superintendent.
Adhere to state and federal requirements.
Board. Both. I say both.
Yeah, I hope you hold Tom to that too.
Evaluate employees,
Superintendent unless it's you.
unless it's me. Support employees.
Both.
Thank you, Rachel. Recommend employees for hire.
Superintendent.
Superintendent recommends, board approves them. Ensure curriculum is taught effectively.
Superintendent.
Recommend curriculum materials.
Superintendent.
Promote district accomplishments.
Both.
Approve a budget.
Board.
Supervise employees.
Superintendent unless it's you.
Submit required reports.
Superintendent.
Boy,
Establish,
you're looking pretty busy, Tom.
yeah, establish
Board.
That's the board.
govern transparently,
Board.
govern ethically,
Board.
engage community,
Both.
design curriculum,
Superintendent.
adopt core beliefs,
Board.
Board.
provide professional development,
Superintendent.
measure progress toward district priorities,
Both.
approve curriculum materials for use,
Board.
Board.
establish committees,
Board.
oversee budget expenditures,
Board.
govern legally,
Board.
Board.
propose a budget,
Superintendent.
set graduation requirements,
Board.
guide committee work,
Both.
communicate district priorities,
Both.
define learner outcomes,
Superintendent.
both are superintendent.
I said superintendent.
We'll go here.
And let me chime in there, and not saying that it's wrong, but typically what I think about that, and I don't know if you guys have one or not. A graduate profile would be that. And it actually would give me an opportunity to press a little bit on this one over here, establish a vision. And my question is, do you want that to be defining the learner outcomes, such as ultimately what your profile of a learner or profile of a graduate would be, and the actual vision of the district? Would you want that to be a shared responsibility between superintendent and board? Or would you like the board to drive that? Or like you've just set up, where you want the vision to come from the board and the defined learner outcomes to come from the superintendent? I just offering that as food for thought.
I think that's a good, I think defining learner outcomes really is both in my mind. It's both of us working together. We got a few, proposed calendar,
Superintendent,
attract employees,
both.
communicate policy.
Board.
Well, wait on that. So, who produces student handbooks? Who produces teacher handbooks? Who, because that's part of communicating policy. Is the board putting that stuff together? Or does that become shared, where the board, when they're engaging with the community, they, and someone says, why do you do something this way? You communicate what the policy is on that. I mean, I think you were even talking a little bit about dress code today. I guarantee that's going to be communicated through student handbook and various things that come directly from the school, not from the board. But the board would also be able to communicate that throughout the community in the interactions they have. Do you see I'm leaning towards shared?
Yes, and I lost my page here, so hold on a second. I had a bunch of stuff pop up on me here.
Oh, okay.
Can't see
I'm going
this.
to move it for you, Tom.
All right.
If you guys want to move it later, well, then convince me otherwise. I feel like it's both of you.
All right, why have I lost my whole screen here? Lost my whole screen. Did you want to name them up? I lost my screen.
Okay, so I've got communicate consistently. Superintendent, shared, or board?
Superintendent, they said.
Superintendent, okay. Because you're paid to take the time to do that. Communicate with the media.
I think that depends on the situation.
Say shared, yeah, sure.
To be shared, okay, if it's appropriate for the board, right?
Or the-
Establish.
Sometimes it's not appropriate for the superintendent if it was, say, like a dismissal of that person. So sure.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. They, I don't know, they may want to communicate with the person being dismissed, but the board's probably going to need to have something to say about that, right? Establish or revise policy.
Board.
Award diplomas.
Board.
Yeah. Generally in Colorado, the board is supposed to approve all graduates, right? Communicate transparently.
Both.
Did you say shared?
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
Enforce policy.
Superintendent.
Yeah, good. I've got report progress toward district priorities to community.
Both.
Yeah, good one. Approve a calendar.
Board.
Yeah, that's a policy that you look what you got here now. I don't know if you can see it up on your big board, but what I've got is the ability to create now a superintendent role, because that all encompasses the green circle that's shared with the board and the blue circle that is designated specifically to the superintendent. And I mean, this is a real even distribution here. I see nothing in the board section that doesn't belong there. And so the board role ultimately becomes the green circle and the or oval and the purple oval. And I'm going to quick screenshot this and before you guys screw it up on your end. And so what you've done right now for me is you've set me up to be able to go ahead and put these in document form. What I like to even do is crosswalk them where it shows one color that this is a shared responsibility or role, and this is one that's designated to the one individual. And I can circle back around to you guys and have these back to you by the end of next week. And if Linda and Tom, if you guys want me to take that draft role that I create and create a draft superintendent evaluation rubric to amount to it, I could have that done for you before Thanksgiving as an option for you to consider. But then there's more work to be done on that, is what's the process and timeline going to be. And so you guys ultimately would have some drafts that you can create final documents from. And what I tell everyone to do, there's never been a perfect superintendent evaluation process. And the only way to make your superintendent evaluation process better is first to set it up, give it a try, and then to circle back and improve on it. And you'd give Tom a tremendous gift by, number one, clearly defining his role, which is you're well on the way to doing here. And number two, actually evaluating him based on that defined role.
George, if I can just, and somebody else can say something too, if you can, just kind of separate those out, send those to us, and then we'll probably talk about that at our December board meeting. That way, I think it's just good, I'm just saying for myself, and hopefully board members would say this too, but for myself, just to recognize what the roles are, just to recognize roles and what those are. That doesn't entail everything either by any means. But I think it's just a good thing for me to have, so I can recognize that, because sometimes I probably go too far, not far enough, or whatever the case. I think that's human nature in many ways. I really do. I think that's human nature. And I think sometimes the principals probably think I go too far that way, and things like that. But just to have that in categories, and I can do that too, that way too. But I think we'll go from there and we'll see where we're at from that point. Because I know we have kind of evaluation that way that we've talked about some here and stuff, but I think this is good for us right now that way to see this.
So Tom, I'll have those to you by the end of next week, and then you can present them to the board in the time and fashion in which you want.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Word of anything for George? This is actually worked better than paper, honestly.
I think so too. Yeah, I was going to use Jamboard, but it turns out it's like obsolete. So that's why I created this one.
Yeah, you sent me this morning. It's like, I've never heard of Figboard or whatever this is.
Yeah.
Never heard of that before. So, okay. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
George.
good to see you guys. Have a good rest of the meeting, and I'll circle back to you, Tom.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, George.
Thanks, George.
Bye-bye.
Future agenda items. I know I've been talking to Carrie Ann. She's kind of concerned about what happens with this talk of the end of Department of Education. I'm like, Board of Education is not what I'm trying to say. Thank you for my words. Thank you for sharing. That just obviously not an action item, but just, something to.
I mean, I
maybe
guess
be a
my
future
question is,
conversation.
what is Clear Creek School District gonna do if the President of the United States shutters a federal agency? I mean, that's a real question, because I don't actually see us being able to do a damn thing about that.
Yeah.
So is that time well spent? I would argue that it is not. And that just turns into now a political argument that I feel like could open up some weirdness in our community, and I would discourage that.
I agree.
Or wait until it happens and see what happens.
Yeah.
And we can move forward however,
Because I mean,
there is an action item to be discussed.
right, and if that happens,
Yeah.
and if what was said happens, Colorado in general is in a bad way, and whether we like it or not, we're in Colorado. So we wouldn't have a lot that we could do in response. So that feels like a bunch of fret for nothing when we've got a lot of like actual work to do that we actually could influence. Just my 2 cents.
Maybe that is the action item, is how do we
Keep
just
doing
make
it.
sure that we're doing the best that we can do right here, right now. Ta-da.
My recommendation.
Seeing no other, provided reading.
Yeah, and I put this in board notes before that way, but it's from a book called Innovate Inside the Box. It's just about, in my mind, it's about, and I think Scott said something about it before, that it's more than that math test, that CMAS. And it's an interesting book if you want, it's not real new anymore. I've got a couple extra copies somehow, one's all marked up, so. But it's just when you think about things, making sure students have opportunities, making sure we're teaching more than just math, science, English, social studies, but life in general.
Yeah, to that point, like, can you clarify with us about the restorative practices at the middle school, high school level?
I will.
Like, that's really important.
I thought we did, but I could be wrong about that because I almost positive started the year we
It
did
is
that. I will find,
something that
I'll find that out.
Cory, I know Cass had brought with her. Cause yeah, we had parents in years past that were concerned about how things were being practiced with the cards and all of that kind of went into restorative practices and first and foremost, and I love that Scott shared, it's building that culture first of trust and, a safe space to bring those concerns forward to. So the fact that he knows that there are the 2 parts and you start with that foundation before you can then utilize that restorative justice piece. But
Just go with Erica's question, because I know when I've talked to Brandy, she's talked about restorative practices. So I will find that out for sure if we have had training or not, or what the plan is, because I know Becky was talking about, Becky and Sunny were talking about.
Yeah, it goes back to what I talked about at our last board meeting, right? With having students have a trusted adult who can intervene when they see that it's necessary for an adult to intervene, versus just kind of like, oh, I didn't see it, blah, blah, like making sure that this is best practice for all teachers.
It's a climate.
Yeah.
I consider it a climate, as the culture climate, whatever you want to say.
Right. Yeah.
I'll find out that board notes this week if we did or
Thank
not with plans.
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Flanagan,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Norm.
yes.
All right.
Are we done?
Yes, we're done. You're completed. It disappeared from my screen. It's like, it's like, it's gone.